thrilled we're having part two, and welcome back to a very attentive audience that wants to hear part two, Curt, to Curt Vincent. Thank you, welcome, and I'm taking notes.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. And before I get started, I just want to be able to say that I was thrilled to get to meet Fripp, and I spent some time with Randall. We had dinner, and it was a really great experience, with the exception of the fact that even though my wife and I are both bit health nuts, and we watch what we eat and we exercise quite a bit, we both ended up with COVID as well. So where I'm normally excited and full of energy, today I'm putting on my dunce cap, because this is the way it's going to feel at certain points, because no matter what has happened, even through my practice, I just have not come off as my normal self. So if you'll forgive me for that. Let's bring up the background, and then we'll make me small again. All right, now this is a follow-on in terms of cybersecurity. And to be clear, it is a huge, huge topic. I just cannot make it clear enough that just how broad it is. And as I was getting ready for this particular presentation, I had to leave a tremendous amount out. And in the preparation, though, is what I learned is that in looking at my own experience, I have a great amount of experience with large organizations, the Army, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America. And now my cybersecurity practice is actually focused on companies that are making between 100 million and $1 billion. So that's really institutional type cybersecurity. And that's not what you folks really want to hear or need. So I've, excuse me, I've tried to do the very best I could in keeping this tailored onto being something that would be useful as well as possibly entertaining. So let's get started. What are we going to discuss today? Well, we're going to talk about some more threats. Can never talk about threats enough. And we're also going to talk about vaults, password managers. I happen to not like the word password manager. I'll explain why later, but I do like vaults. Something I decided to throw in was just the idea of how data can be correlated to be used against you, which I'll explain a little bit. And then we'll wrap up with some prevention and things along those lines. Again, we're not going to talk about GRC, which is governance, regulatory, and compliance. I usually bring this up because of the fact that cybersecurity is three components, three. The first is the IT sec, the IT security, the geeky stuff. This is all anybody knows about. This is all anybody ever sees. But there's also the GRC aspect, which is sort of like, I like to explain it as, everybody loves to cook, nobody likes to do any cleaning up. That's what the GRC part is. And then the last piece is InfoSec, information security. And that's a component, we'll speak a little bit on that, as you'll see. Now, this is the only slide that I've resurrected, if you will, from my last week. I just want to be able to make it clear in case anybody wasn't here for last time, is that these are absolute statistics that says 82% of cyber insurance claims are because somebody clicked on something they shouldn't. Keep that in mind. And that another 8% of insurance claims, cyber insurance claims, are because of insider threat, which are such things as disgruntled employees and criminals that are planted themselves within an organization to be able to do some damage of some sort. So what that means is that 90% of all the threats that we usually have are internal. And they're mostly people-oriented type of threats, and not the sort of thing you see on a lot of the different movies. That stuff happens too, but it's not the bulk. And so only 10% are the external type of threats. Once again, it's people, people, people. We have met the enemy, and he is us. So let's dig into the new stuff. First of all, I wanted to start off by asking if anybody's ever played the game Whack-A-Mole. I used to take my kids to Chuck E. Cheese 10,000 years ago and just used to watch them having so much fun smacking a different mole that would pop up. And that I realized in flying back home from Nashville, I realized this is a really good way to be able to describe cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is that the moment you smack one, another one pops up. And this is really, really true when it comes to operating systems and the patching that goes on. As soon as they find whoever they is, whether it be Apple or it be Microsoft or other type of companies, when they find some sort of hole in their software, they patch it, and that usually creates another hole. Now, you can't sit back and say that the vendors are incompetent. That is so unfair. So one of the things I want to be able to start off is by explaining today's threatscape, in as much as how many lines of code we're talking about these days. Now, this little diagram, which I don't expect you to be able to see, it's just to be able to give you a feel for the magnitude. Top left-hand corner, you can't even see it. It's a little teeny weeny line. That is MS-DOS, or back in the Apple II era. And then in the bottom, you can see that the line for the green there was folded over itself a bunch of times. That's actually Google. And it's a bunch of lines of code. So with that being stated, just to give you a reference, 1 million lines of code is equivalent to the book War and Peace. And that's about 1,225 pages. So with that being the case, we'll start with just looking at an Android. And an Android, just a little Android phone, is between 12 and 15 million lines of code. That's quite a bit. That's like 15 volumes of War and Peace in this little tiny thing that you shove in your back pocket. I don't have the statistics for iPhones. There's a lot of different reasons why, but it's a lot. But I do have that Windows these days, whether it be Windows 10 or Windows 11, it's about 50 million lines of code. And on top of this, the Apple operating system is about 80 million lines of code. So I'm going to stop here for just a second and just say that I think the operating system companies are doing a pretty good job of trying to stay up with the numbers of holes that they find and they patch. And the race, it's an absolute race between the good guys finding the new set of holes versus the bad guys finding the set of holes. And I'm going to put a rumor to bed right this second. A lot of people say, well, Apple's operating system is that much more secure than Windows. And it's absolutely positively not true. While Apple does a darn good job of trying to keep the threats to a minimal, the thing is that if you ever heard Willie Sutton, the bank robber from the 1930s, he was asked, why do you rob banks? And he said, that's where the money is. Well, the truth of the matter is that 75% of all the computers out there are Windows-based, and a lot of them are for commercial reasons. So a lot of the criminals focus on Windows because there's a bigger hit rate. That's all. So what this means is that with all of these patches that are to be done and the race to discover the vulnerabilities, then whether it's the good guys or the bad guys who find them first, this has caused a cottage industry to spring up. And a lot of people have heard of these different companies. And one of the most famous right now are the ones that do what's called endpoint detection and response, EDR. Back in the day, we had things that did virus detection. It's gone way, way, way beyond that. And we've got all sorts of companies out there that try and protect your endpoint. Endpoint can be any type of computing device to include your cell phones, et cetera, your smartphones. But what I want to be able to say is that while you've heard of companies like Symantec and Carbon Black, F-Secure, CloudStrike, there's a whole bunch of them out there. One that I'm going to caution you that if you're using it, drop it. And that's Kaspersky. Kaspersky is a Russian-oriented company that used to be very, very good. In fact, I had a subscription to it until a couple of years ago when it was proven that Kaspersky has had ties with the Russian government. Don't know if it's forced to have ties, it doesn't matter. The point is that couldn't be trusted anymore. And since I was doing work with government contractors up until about 2 months ago when I moved from Connecticut to Pennsylvania, and I wanted to stop doing any kind of support. But I had 2 years worth of support left with Kaspersky, and I just had to completely abandon it and go to something different. So I just want to be able to make it clear that you've got to keep changing, and you've got to be able to make sure that you keep yourself well protected. And these EDRs try and do that, but it's really like a mom chasing a baby all around the house, trying to keep them from getting themselves in trouble. And the reason I say this is that the end user, by and large, wants to remain fat, dumb, and happy and allow technology to support the problems that are out there. And yet, as you've heard me say in the past, and you've seen on CNN or any kind of news, that the biggest threat that right this minute is ransomware, which means somebody clicked on something they shouldn't. So what I want to be able to come up with some sort of an analogy that explained what endpoint the EDRs actually look like in reality. And I had 2 different calls with 2 different FBI guys a couple days ago. And I said, hey, what about this for an analogy? And they said, yeah, use that, use that. It's not politically incorrect. And so therefore, I said, it's sort of like an attack suit that these trainers use for attack dogs, and that they have to be put in this great big, like North Korean pajama type of suit to be able to train the dog as the dog's attacking them. But one of the things that I want to be able to make clear is that when they do this kind of training, they only allow the dog to attack for a short period of time, because what happens is if the dog is left to be able to continue attacking, they're able to get in and rip away, like we'll say an arm or something, and get a foothold and tear that away and then hurt the trainer. And we don't want that. So the whole idea of using this analogy is just that basically there is no such thing as 100% protection. And that number 2, you've got to be able to get involved as part of the defense. You can't just depend on all of technology. Now, with technology, basically, we've got such things as company border type of technology, like firewalls, which keep bad guys out, allegedly. And then we have data leakage, DLP, which keeps the intellectual property from leaving the premise. Or we also have these things like called web proxies, which you can connect to if you work for a company, and you must use before you can get out on the internet. And that prevents you from going to places like porn sites or criminal sites, hate sites, and there's 50 other categories that can be turned on or turned off, depending upon the company's ethical and technical type of beliefs. But you cannot just depend on that. And I wanted to be able to come up with a quick story to be able to drive this home. And when I was down in Nashville, I was able to finally meet my coach. He's become a mentor since. He's a wonderful human being, John Cilio, speaker that speaks on cybersecurity. Great, great guy. And he gave me a big hug when we finally got to meet, because we were meeting during COVID when he was my coach. And he gave me a big hug. I hope I didn't give him COVID. But anyway, the main point is that we were able to finally catch up face to face, since that was my first influence. And I said, John, there's a story you like to tell that you use on your YouTubes and all. I would like to be able to use that as an example, but I need your permission. And I explained which story I wanted to use. He says, oh my God, yes, please use that story. It really drives things home. So I want to be able to say that John tells a story as that a number of years ago, he and his family had a software company, and it was a successful company. So therefore, he and his wife, Mary, went out and bought a new house. When they bought the new house, they did the classic thing that many people do, is they try and declutter when they got in. So John did like everybody does and threw out a bunch of junk, and that included a bunch of the mortgage application, and he threw it out in the trash. He didn't shred it. So what happens is that there are criminals that are out there that are watching people sell houses, and then they watch for, at that site, they watch for the moving van to come in. And when the moment the moving van comes in, they start sending an official looking truck in the middle of the night, by 2 in the morning, and they take your trash. They then go off to a warehouse, they dump the trash on the ground and sort through it. And in John's case, he was a victim of identity theft because all this information that they were able to use, and it just about destroyed he and his family. And so John said, yeah, use that because I love being able to use examples of cyber-like activities that are not based on the wire, not based on network. These are cases of things that were thrown in a trash can. So thank you, John, for letting me able to use that. Now, I want to be able to shift gears and talk a little bit about the internet and some of the things that are below the surface. A lot of people have heard about the deep web and the dark web, and I just want to be able to clear up what these different layers are, if you will. Now, most of us spend all of our time, so we think, on the surface web. These are things like Google and Facebook and Wikipedia and blah, blah, blah. Anything that Google or any of the search engines, DuckDuckGo, and that the search engines that will integrate the different searches that these things called web crawlers run around the internet looking and organize, because you'd never find it if it wasn't for these search engines. So these things are all out on the surface web, and it's huge. But what's also huge, in fact, it's even larger, is something known as the deep web. Now, the deep web is nothing that is not, it's nothing scary. You have used the deep web often. What the deep web, which is actually much, much larger, this diagram is not to scale. It's much, much larger, but it's places that you have to have a password to be able to get in and use. Such examples are like your banking accounts, your medical records, any of these type of activities that require a password that you don't want Google to be able to allow searching to find. The dark web is the ugly one. And the dark web is where the criminals live and the criminals do their thing. And what I want to be able to talk about very, very briefly is Tor, which is the method by which the dark web works. But I just want you to understand that the dark web are such things as where data is sold, and something that used to be called Silk Road, which was like an illegal eBay, where you could go on and buy drugs, you could buy a hit, a murder. People will basically bid on this. This is just an ugly, ugly place, and you don't want to go there. You can get there, but you don't want to go there. It's just a dangerous place to be, but you have to get there on purpose. You cannot stumble into it. So here, I'm going to explain a little bit about how that works. Tor was something that was created by the US Navy, and it's known, thwart stands for the onion router. And I want to be able to explain very briefly how it works. And the Navy came up with this to be able to protect intelligence agents who were behind enemy lines, and if they would use like a cafe, an internet cafe or a Starbucks or whatever, to be able to send information back to the home office, they had to be able to do it safely. And much more importantly, they had to be able to do it anonymously. So here's how Tor works. And I'm going to say very, very briefly, just in the interest of time, how it works. But basically, I hope you can see my little browser pointer. But you have to be able to use this thing called a Tor client. And it's nothing more than Firefox that's been altered. And instead of talking directly to computer number 5 over here, the way Tor works is that you talk to another Tor router. And what it does, and I'm going to do this very quickly, but when it gets the message that says, please let me connect to computer number 5, it says, okay. And then it sends that message down to computer 3 that thinks it's coming only from computer 2. And computer 3 then sends the message to computer 4, and it only thinks the message is coming from computer 3. It can't see computer 2 or computer 1 in any way, shape, or form. All of the footprints have been removed. Computer 4 is the exit point of the Tor network, and then sends it, and you can see it's red again, which means it's unencrypted, and sends it to this particular site. And computer 5 knows it's talking to this person, but does not know how it got there, and has to send a message back to 4, sends it to 3, sends it to 2, sends it to 1. So it's a little bit slow, but it does provide and makes you anonymous. And that's important because not only can the Navy intelligence officers use this, but it was also released to the public so that oppressed people can do it. If you were in Iran or if you're in China and you want to be able to do some things that were not approved by the government, you can use Tor. Now, with that said, technology is not good or evil. It depends on whose hands it's in. It's like a rolling pin. You can use a rolling pin to make bread and feed somebody, or you could also use a rolling pin to ruin someone's day and use it as an ugly stick, as we say. So while it's slow, it is very useful, but the criminals have used this to be able to set up activities, to be able to sell drugs, stolen items, gobs of data, etc. But keep this in mind. Keep this concept of Tor in mind. We're going to come back to this in just a few moments. Now, you ever Googled yourself? Everybody's Googled themselves. And sometimes you can be shocked what you find. In fact, I was shocked to find that the state of Connecticut posts your political affiliation, which really ticked me off, only from the standpoint that I'm an old Army officer. And Army officers are apolitical. You serve at the pleasure of the president, and it does not matter. You just serve. And that's a very different way of thinking. So you want to be able to maintain your anonymity and such. But while we've Googled ourselves, one of the things that makes me laugh is that some people actually add to the digital exhaust by the fact that they leave their GPS on the phone. You put in restaurant reviews, you do likes, you put in comments and opinions, and these all become breadcrumbs that you thought were insignificant, but they can be correlated together. Such things as buying habits and search patterns to be able to come up with a sales profile on you. And this can be sold not even by criminals, but this can be sold so that you can be targeted for sales. I'm not going to get into it, but as many people have, you've probably heard the stories where people have had Alexa on, and the next thing you know, your browser, you mentioned something to your partner, and then the next thing you know, you're in your browser, and that same sort of thing has come up. That's very, very disturbing. And I only use Alexa. I turn it on to be able to keep my hands free when I use it as a timer when I'm barbecuing, and then I turn it right back off. I don't want that thing listening. But the bad guys can use this as well. So the stuff is correlated to be able to create something called a kill chain, which I don't have time to go into. But basically, this is used to either target you for a sales or target you to be exploited in one way, shape, or form. So with that being the case, how can we make ourselves a little bit more hidden, if you will? And remember I said to keep in mind the Tor service? Well, the Tor service is much more difficult to use. These days, you can use these services that are called VPN services. And what this means, and I've got one up here that I happen to like, it's called a PIA. And it's not, a pain in the neck. It's private internet access. And that's just one. There are plenty of other ones out there. They're not that expensive. And the way this works is that you no longer connect directly to the internet and therefore allow different sort of digital exhaust to be able to show where you're going. Instead, you connect to the VPN, and then you always connect to where you want to go from there. So no matter where you're connecting, it always looks like it's coming from the VPN. So that eliminates and makes you a lot more anonymous. So this is just helps with security. Now, we all have done this, and I've recently started to use VPNs much more aggressively than I have in the past because the number of exploitations is getting off the charts. And going to coffee shops, airports, hotels, you can be hijacked. And what hijacked means is that you think you're connecting to the local Starbucks, and it actually turns out to be the guy sitting across the room, and he's got a little device that makes it look like it's a free internet, and you connect to it, and he's now your VPN service and is now looking at everything you send and behaving as a negative VPN. So that's one of the reasons why you want to be able to use the VPN services. Please look into one of those. Now, I promised we would talk about vaults. And I like to call them vaults versus a password manager for a very good reason. You can use an Excel spreadsheet just to be able to keep control of all of your passwords, and that's a password manager. But the kind of password managers I'm talking about are the different services that are out there, and I'm not going to say one is better than the other. It's just a matter of which one you're comfortable with. In fact, the government really likes Keeper, but I've been using LastPass for a very long time, so I happen to like it, and I'm going to keep using it until further notice. So what a password service does for you is that it keeps all of your passwords for you, and you don't need to memorize them. You don't need to even worry because the password manager does this for you and keeps everything encrypted, regardless if it's on your phone or if it's on your computer, whether it be a laptop or a desktop, etc. So let's take a look at how this works. Now, this is the way LastPass, when you first set it up, you just need to come up with one heck of a difficult password that you can remember, and one that would be difficult for a bad guy to be able to break into. It's usually best to use like lines of a song or lines of a verse or some sort of sentence that's in English that has spaces and all, and that's what you use. And here's one that I'm going to use as an example. When I'm 64, the old Beatles song, that's actually doesn't look like a very good one, but it's actually pretty darn good because within that password, when I'm 64, you've got two capital letters, W and I. You got 4 special characters, a couple of spaces, the apostrophe, and then the exclamation point, 2 numbers, the 64, and that's 12 characters. That's pretty good. But the more characters you use, the more you're protecting all the crown jewels, if you will. So just if you were to just extend that to, will you still need me when I'm 64? That brings it out to 36 characters, adds 5 more special characters, and it makes it even more safe. And that's the only password that I need to know. And that's the only one I need to worry about, because the way it works is like this. When you first log in, it's sort of like a box of index cards. Each one of those little squares represents a password from a website. And before I go any farther, I just want to be able to make it clear. We don't have time to talk about it, but as you can see on the left-hand side, there's a whole bunch of other services the password services give you, like notes, as a for instance. You can put all sorts of different notes in. I've got images of my passports and all sorts of stuff that I can get to from anywhere in the world using the password service. But I only want to look at the typical password and the password, your credentials that you use at a particular website. So let's look at one of these cards. This is one that's just a phony example, but basically you can see it's got the URL. You got a name field in there, and you can just, that's for you. You can just put in there whatever you want. And then the username and the password is in there, and it's encrypted until you need it. And LastPass helps you also select a really difficult password, which it will actually squirt into the website for you. And so let's show you how this works. You go to the website, and this example is like GoToMeeting. You can see there's a little tiny symbol down there that's in the field. That in this case, that's what the LastPass looks like. It's the little logo for it, and it would be the one for your particular service. and you can click on it and it automatically squirts it in. You don't even know what the password is. You don't even know you need to know your credentials. It just fills it in. It makes life much, much better. And you can sleep much, much better. Now, the other thing I just want to be able to say is that these passwords, you can share them. My wife and I share a handful of them to include like our banking, so that this way, if I change the banking password, it changes on her version of LastPass as well, which is really handy. You can also share with your employees. And so therefore, if you want them to have access to something, you can click a particular little selection point that says, let them use the password, but don't let them see what it is. So that this way, if they quit or you fire them, you stop sharing the password and they no longer have access to the application that they had access to before. So this should help you sleep better. Now let's look at things that are able to help you sleep even a little bit better. And that's multi-factor authentication. We talked about that last time a little tiny bit. And it's multi-factor means it's something you know, like a password, something you have, like a little token, whether it's a hardware token or an authentication application that runs on your phone or your computer, or something you are, which is biometrics. And I just want to be able to quickly mention that what two-factor authentication is that it's usually a password and then another one of these. And these days, it's usually best to be able to go with the tokens. If you have a physical token, like the RSA token or ones you can buy off of Amazon, they're the best. The next best is the phone app. And the reason why the physical application is better than the phone app is just that there's only one copy of it. So that's always much, much safer. But the phone apps are not bad. And the third is to be able to get a text. The texts are not that safe in the overall scheme because it's being sent in the clear. And just a quick plug for something you need to look into. A lot of us have moved away from texting and are using a program called Signal these days. If you've never heard of that, make a quick note and look that up. It's taken off. It's really, really good. And the last thing I'll just say is that biometrics are really good. Don't get me wrong, but they can be spoofed. The technology is good, but it's not perfect yet. So I only use biometrics if I absolutely have to. Now I'm going to start wrapping things up here. And I want to be able to make it clear that that I go to the gym a couple times a week when I'm not sick like I am now, but and I've made a couple of observations about gyms. And the first one is that I've never seen a comedian notice, and that is people that drive around a parking space looking for a really good parking space in a gym just to be able to, give you the finger and cut you off and take that spot to be able to then walk this short distance in and get on a treadmill. I mean, what is that? What's up with that? So I always park far away and get my workout started sooner. The second thing I've noticed is that when New Year's resolutions come out, it's impossible to be able to get on your machines because everybody's got new resolutions and they go out and they start hitting the gym, and I can't get to my machines until 14 February when everybody gives up and starts eating chocolate on Valentine's Day. But the point is that when you go to the gym, you just don't go do 1,000 push-ups January 1st and then clap your hands and say, I'm done. I don't have to come back until Thanksgiving. I'm all set. No, you have a program. You don't do it as a project. And cybersecurity is the same thing. You got to stay up with it. You got to keep the situational awareness. You got to keep good diligence and keep good discipline, such as changing your passwords every now and then, which is easy when you do it through a password manager. So with that, I'm just going to say we're going to wrap up, and that is, people are still and are the biggest risk. You can't depend on technology. You need the technology. I use the technology, but you just have to keep in mind that we are still the biggest risk in cyber threats. Digital exhaust is used against us, so be careful what you leave out there that can be used against you. start looking into using a VPN service, especially when you're traveling. A number of people on here are travelers and part of NSA. You want to be able to look into using this. It'll keep you safe from a hotel room or an airport. The Vault, boy, you really need to use these. They make life easier. And remember, it's not a project, it's a program. Lather, rinse, and repeat. And from there, I'm going to make myself big again, and we'll turn it over for questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
I want to mention thank you to Anastasia, because you handled this from the beginning.
Thank you, Anastasia.
Anastasia has a question. I see your hand up. Come off mute and.
I actually have a few. So first off, but Larry Pond's the one that told us about Curt. So
Thank you, Larry.
Okay, first off, is it just in a vault that we can use spaces and passwords, or is that like a general thing and I've just never even tried it? Because I think, you know, you had spaces in your password phrases, so I'm curious about that. Also, do you have recommendations of VPN? I've never thought as a personal consumer to use a VPN. So I don't know if you have a recommendation. I think you mentioned a PIA, but I don't know if that's like a brand or how we get.
Yeah, that is a brand name. Private.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Private internet access, all one word.com. It's the one, it's pretty cheap. It's only like, I was looking before this call, and I think I pay like $72 for 3 years for the entire family. So that works out to be like $2.50, which is a bargain. And I want to answer.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
that's just for the VPN, which
Okay.
I think is a horrible name. It should be like your proxy or whatever, you know. I think that would be better. But I want to be able to answer your question about the password vault and using spaces. That's a very, very, very good question. You use the spaces to be able to get into your vault. You allow the companies such as Keeper, LastPass, et cetera, to be able to create the passwords for you. And you need to use a couple of YouTubes. It takes a little bit to understand. It's not hard, but the main point is it comes up with these ugly passwords, and you're able to, like, if the website says, no, we don't allow you to use special characters, then there's a place where you click inside of LastPass that says, don't use additional types of special characters, and you tailor it for that particular website. But you don't even need to know what it looks like. What LastPass or any of them does this for you. That's the important thing I want you to understand. And that the reason I wanted to be able to put in the spaces is that this way you can stick to like a line of a song or a verse or of a poem or something like that. You don't have to memorize the ugly ones. Just keep it simple. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I guess I just didn't know that we could even start with spaces to begin with. You know, there's so many specifications. You set up passwords for certain things, and then you feel like you finally got the one that works, and then they're like, oh no, you can only have 8 characters.
Yes.
You can't use a special character, you know.
Yes.
And it's just crazy making, which is why I'm looking forward to doing a vault instead. So I just come up with the one, and then it handles the rest. And I assume that I'm setting this up, and I can do this from my PC, but then from my mobile device,
Yep.
it all hooks up. Okay. All
Yes.
right, great.
Now I'm going to warn you, it's not perfect, but I have a wife who is not a technologist. Okay. I love my wife, but she when we met 8 years ago, when we met, her password for everything was Poncho 25. And in fact, I like to joke and say I would go up on the East Coast on and see on a billboard, you know, for a good time called Poncho 25. It was just, she used it for her bank. She used it for everything. And she thought it was safe because it had a word and numbers. But yet she was using it at the same everywhere. And one of the things that a vault will do is make sure you're only using it in one place. And you can also see previous passwords. And once again, it takes a little bit of time to get used to it, but it's just like anything else. Once you got used to it, you go, oh, okay. And there's tons of YouTubes out there that show you how to use it, but I don't have enough time to be able to teach it here, and there are unique for each product. So check them all out. Use one. Yes, Patricia.
Are you telling us that when we're in a hotel, we should not be using the free internet?
That's a very good question. And I'm saying, go ahead and use it with a VPN.
Okay.
I don't use the VPN when I'm at home, but when I'm at Starbucks or I'm in the airport or I'm in the hotel, I fire up the VPN because I have to use their service, or I could use the cell phone, etc. But that's a good question. That's the time you want to use it.
Okay, and I have 4 computers, 2 monitors here and 2 laptops that I travel with. Is a vault just something you sign into, or the VPN, is it something you would put on each computer?
Okay, I don't want to confuse the issue. Let's keep them separate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the vaults first.
Yes.
The vaults you have to log into per device.
Okay. All
It's
right.
the same password, like when I'm 64.
Yes.
It's the same password on your phone. It's the same password on your laptop. Doesn't matter which one it is. It's because it's cloud-based. So therefore that's one password, but it's per device. And by the way, you can also say, remember it for X number of days. I don't want to have to keep typing that back in. And it's pretty good about that. So, but then the VPN, the difference there is that it's basically per device again, but it's how that device is connecting to the internet. And you want to be able to tell this device, okay, this time I'm in a hotel, I'm in an airport lounge. I don't want anybody to be able to see, because they're unencrypted. It's open. And so therefore, if you connect to the VPN as a proxy, you're connecting to it encrypted. So therefore you're safe. You're safe. So you can use the unsafe service by using the VPN to make it safe. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
Good.
Good question. Good answer.
Absolutely great question.
Buchanan. And then Betty, I think I saw you raise your hand.
Curt, thanks for coming back to see us. And what I like about your presentations is that there's so much useful information in there. Last time we talked about, I'm sorry, there's another question related to that, something we talked about, but I'm curious to know what the state of affairs is with TikTok. There's a recent press report about TikTok being a conduit to the PRC military intelligence. I don't know what to believe on that. I don't even use TikTok, but do you have any information that would confirm that?
But it's funny you should mention something I talk about in different type of presentations is the difference between doing cybersecurity within the government and outside of the government. And when I was in the government and I was running I was the operations officer for the armies, we did things very different in as much as we would let the bad guys in and then we'd watch what they did and to be able to figure out what their tactics and such are. And I'm not going to go into much detail there, except to say that I cannot say with clear conscience that TikTok is affiliated with the government. But I will say that in the same way that Kaspersky is part of Russia and it's been proven to be part of the collusion, I would be careful. I would be very, very careful because it could be part. I'm not saying it is or isn't. And I do not have the kind of access that I used to have, even with my newly found FBI buddies I just made last week. I used to deal with the FBI at Carnegie Mellon quite a bit. And I just found some folks that I knew from a while ago. And I'm still not allowed to know the kind of things I used to be privy to. But I can just tell you, if you distill that, man, I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
It makes you wonder what's I don't use TikTok, as I mentioned, but what level of detail of information about each one of the users is collected by TikTok, and then potentially be handed over to people we don't want to have it. And the mention I made earlier, I just remembered, was that you and I talked about the OPM hack back several years ago, where PRC intelligence got into the Office of Personnel Management records, so they know my, you know, social security number, ID, my date of birth, home address, my dog's name. You know.
Yes.
So.
And what you had for lunch.
Yeah, exactly. But quick second question for you, Curt, if you will. I think it was a couple of years ago, the FBI got into it with Apple, I think it was, because they had a pretty serious criminal case.
Yeah, I know which one you mean.
It was encrypted information. What's the state of the relationship between agencies like the FBI and high tech?
It's always been adversarial. First of all, I just want to digress and just quickly mention that when you had mentioned OPM last time, I had also brought up Titan Rain, which, excuse me, this is still the COVID stuff, but basically Titan Rain, the Chinese were able to use tactics that were called low and slow to collect terabytes and terabytes of data, everything from intellectual property from airplanes and fighters and things along these lines. Tremendous amount of damage that was done in that regard. Now, the reason why I want to be able to mention that is that, excuse me, a number of years ago, and I mean a number of years ago, the NSA tried to get all manufacturers to be able to, US-based manufacturers, to put something in called the Clipper chip. And the Clipper chip, and I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail, but they wanted to be able to have this installed in all American-made devices so that it would allow, in the interest of something like the Patriot Act, that they would be able to have access to any encrypted data that was on that type of device. And basically, it was shot down by industry. It was a huge fight, and I support that. Even as a retired Army officer, I do not want my data to be exposed on any way, shape, or form. And so therefore, I happen to support Apple when they fought the government, saying we're not going to give you the encryption to be able to break into that, because it would just violate the trust between Apple and all of its customers. So it will remain adversarial, it will continue, and it's the nature of the game. I also am going to say that I don't want to see our government have more access to us and then have other governments are collecting on us as well, as I had mentioned with Titan Rain. So this is going to remain if I can use the word libertarian type of an agenda, where people need to fight for their rights. And personally, I support that and hope that that continues. And I say that as a retired lieutenant colonel.
Thank you.
Betty, I think you were next, Betty, I believe. And then Derek, I see you, and Susan and Alan. And then I have my hand raised, or had it raised. So.
Curt, thank you very much for giving the presentation under the weather as you are. We appreciate it.
Thank you for noticing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look great. I'm just saying, you must feel crummy.
I do.
And I'm so sorry. Okay, couple questions. You have scared the bejesus out of me. I was planning on being on my computer all plane flight across the country tomorrow and actually paying for the internet instead of listening to a book. But I don't have a VPN, and I'm nervous. I've never had big problems. So that's one question. Is it easy to set up a VPN?
Yes.
I mean, I had one before and it was awful years ago. So is that something, or should I don't do it at the airport, but I thought on United, that might be, who knows, not safer, but any comments on that until I can get somebody to help me set up a VPN?
Well, I'm just going to say this, define safer. I mean, because the person that might be on the airplane that is able to insert themselves might be somebody who's really ugly. You follow me? In terms of, when I say ugly, I mean in terms of cyber wise.
Right.
So you never know which time it's what they call script kiddies that are just, they're just doing it because they can download the tools and have fun with it, or if it's somebody who could really do damage to you. So the one I recommended there is one of the cheapest. The private internet access, all one word.com. And like I said, and I'm not selling that particular
No, I
one.
know.
Go look at other ones. It's just that one is like one of the dirt cheapest. And it's pretty easy to set up. And these days, YouTube's your friend. I mean, you can just go and see some tutorials, and you can see how to be able to quickly set it up. You can do that all before you buy it. But I just highly recommend that particular one, because if you buy a 3-year subscription, it's $2.03 a month for your family. What's the excuse? That's for your family. You know, many people you want, you know, so it's not that hard. And I would really recommend looking into learning how to use it. And again, you don't need to use it from home. You should. You should, because you're leaving too much digital dust just even coming from your house. Because I'm just going to say they to keep you paranoid. They can see that you're coming from your house. And there's this thing called signatures, which means you put a whole bunch of things together and you say, aha, that's Betty.
And then another part of the question, a second question, is you mentioned two-factor authentication.
Yes.
Texting is not as good as it should be.
Yes.
But we should still do it until we can figure out something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. The reason I say this is, like, it depends on your bank. Your bank says, would you like to set up two-factor authentication? Most people say no. And I'm bringing my wife into doing it, kicking and screaming. Even though, by the way, I was going to say that she came to LastPass a few years ago, probably 7 years ago. I forced her to do it when we got married. And because it's like, you're not going to expose me because we're a team now. And while she went into it kicking and screaming, she will use lethal force if you try to take it away from her, because it's made her life so much easier once she learned how to use it. So anyway, I'm sorry, what was the question?
About texting and this.
Oh, texting. Yes. The only reason I mentioned that is that I'm using banks as a, for instance, they might give you options of having a two-factor authentication. Yes, use it. And texting is, if they give you that as an option, it's the least useful. If they give you an option of like Google Authenticator, that's a pretty good one. Makes sense?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So if any of these anything that you use, I think even eBay these days is offering it if you want to be able to use two-factor. I'm just saying, start getting used to using it and do it. It just, you know, that I'm going to say this, that one of the biggest resistances I get in the cybersecurity world is that people say, well, it won't happen to me. And it becomes, I don't want to say I told you so. I get no value out of that. And with companies that are under 100 million, they are deep in deniability. They say it's not going to happen to me. And I get no pleasure at when they find that they've been victim. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
We're running out of time, so we've only got a few minutes. So make your questions short and sweet. And I think we probably only have time for one. Derek?
Tony, I'll make them very quick. Thanks, Curt. Greetings from the United Kingdom. That was fantastic presentation. Thank you. I run a chat show over here. I wonder if I could bend your ear for 20 minutes of your time.
Absolutely.
That'd be really kind. Right. These are yes or no questions. Am I safer using my phone hotspot in Starbucks rather than Starbucks?
Yes.
I am.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I didn't mention it. There's never enough time, but yes.
Thank you. Question 2, is face recognition software okay for my bank? Because I got it on my phone and I use it all the time. You've worried me.
No, actually, facial recognition is a whole different technology. And you Brits are light years ahead of the rest of us. I remember going to London and seeing all the cameras all over of London in particular. And facial recognition is not the same as biometrics, if you will. That's an algorithm that maps your face. Yeah, there are some instances where it could be done with a picture, but we won't go into that because there's depth and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I actually support facial recognition.
Okay, question 3 is I've just Googled myself and come up with 392 million entries. I expect Patricia's got 10 times more than that.
Absolutely.
But you just worried me on that. Goodness knows, what have I just put into the...
Yes. And it's not just stuff that you've done. That's called digital exhaust. There's stuff about you that other people might want to comment on. and you don't have control over
So should I sleep?
newspaper articles,
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
right?
Thank you for that.
You
Thank
bet.
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
Susan?
Okay, quickly, I read an article, someone from cybersecurity, and I posted it. One of the advice was no Alexa or any of her cousins.
Yeah.
I never had one. I never understood it, but everyone I know has one. Is this as dangerous as I think it is?
Absolutely. And I don't want to disparage anything, but like I said, there are lots and lots and lots of examples where you're talking in the room and you're discussing something like you want to be able to prove it yourself. I've tried it. I plug mine back in, I turn it on, and then I bring up something totally random like Stonehenge. And then the next thing you know, I'm on Google, and I'm getting hits on Stonehenge. You get the point. And it might take a while, but I would test it. The other one is Google. Okay, Google. I use Okay Google all day long. And in fact, I woke up and I said that. But a lot of times I'll just shut that off because I'm helping it understand more about me.
You just got my Google going, by the way.
Sorry about that, Tony.
All right.
And Siri is the same. Do we need to shut off Siri?
You can do whatever you want. This particular is a free country. You can do whatever you want, but just remember this. I'm going to say this, and I hope you can appreciate this. A lot of people on this call, we go back to the day before TSA, and that you could just smoke a cigarette in the lounge waiting for the plane to land. I'm bringing cigarettes in just to be able to show the ridiculous how long ago.
With
But
your
the thing
family
is-
hanging out with you too.
Yes,
Because
yes.
they could walk you onto the plane.
Exactly right. Exactly right. But because of security and safety, we started to give up certain rights. And as I like to say, and this is actually distasteful, my way of saying it, but if you want to be really safe before you get on a plane, we're all going to have to go through a cavity search. But we don't want to. So therefore, we put a line and say, this is where the line in the sand is. You can go this far. And so therefore, that's the way the security has become at that point. You have to put your own line in the sand at home and trade convenience for safety. Convenience for safety. And you have to have your own threshold. And by the way, my threshold gets tighter and tighter the more near points of death, if you will, I have. Not talking about an airplane, talking about from a cyber standpoint. When I discover something that says, oh my gosh, I ducked that bullet. Makes
You have
sense?
been marvelous.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing part 2. The fact that you have COVID, not surprised you got it at NSA. I knew it'd be a mini spreader, but I just take it easy and please rest the rest of the day and
I
week.
will. And thank you all. So, all right. Thank you so much.
For